sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You will lead me through the fire, and in darkest night, you were close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. Yeah. And all my life you have been faithful. Oh, and all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Yeah. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Oh, your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running, and it keeps running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so
Good evening, church. Welcome to our Wednesday night service. It's been another beautiful day today, and another day that God has given us, and I think He deserves for us to come into His Word tonight and just be refreshed and be filled anew and strengthened in the Lord so that we can continue His service. So tonight we will be studying beginning in Psalms chapter 53. It's a continuation of where we left off last time, and it's Psalm, and obviously it's mostly, or at least half of it, more or less, is written by David, and a lot of these Psalms are very inspiring in the sense that we can identify with what David experienced in his life. You know, in Psalms 98, it says, "Oh, sing to the Lord a new song." And a lot of these Psalms, that's exactly what they are. They are songs that were sung during worship services there in the tabernacle and later in the temple. It is estimated that in total there are about 800,000 songs that have been that are written every year. The last 100 years, it's estimated that a total about 80 million songs have been written. And what's interesting about songs is that when you listen to an old song, that it immediately brings memories back. I don't know if you've had it in your life, but maybe you drive down the road, you turn on the radio, or you hear this song, something that was an old song, and immediately it brings memories back to a time when maybe that song was sung in a special time of your life, and you remember that. And old songs have their place. There's songs that are timeless, like the song of Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art, the Old Rugged Cross. These are timeless songs, and they're old songs, they're great songs, but new songs are needed to express ourselves to the Lord in new seasons and in new ways, under new circumstances. And Psalm 53 is a psalm that is an old psalm that was written before, but it is revised. There's some revision that went on in this song to fit a new narrative, to fit a new time, a new circumstance, a new season in life. And it's almost identical to Psalms 14, except for some minor changes. And it's as if after the great victory that we saw in our previous study that Hezekiah had when the Assyrians surrounded the city, 185,000 of them, and an angel went out at night and he slaughtered them, he killed them. And there was this song of victory that was written after that. And they used the same song that was written in Psalm 14, except they made some changes. In this particular instance, we know that the general Rabshakeh, who came and threatened the people and wrote a letter to them, which they brought to Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, who brought it to the Lord, he mocked the God of Israel. He mocked the God of Jehovah. And in this song, it reveals that those who reject the true God are really fools. The 185,000 dead bodies laying around the walls of Jerusalem prove that. That to not believe in God, to not trust in Him, is quite foolish. So let's begin reading in verse 1 of chapter 53. It says, well, let's read a heading. It says, the chief musician sat to Mahalat, a contemplation of David. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and have abominable iniquity. There is none who does good. God looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. Every one of them has turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is none who does good, no, not one. Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread, and do not call upon God? There they are, in great fear, where no fear was, for God has scattered the bones of him who comes against you. You can imagine the people lying around the city. Their bones are scattered. You have put them to shame because God has despised them. Oh, that salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When God brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. And that is exactly what happened. Salvation came out of Zion and Israel rejoiced. And here in Psalms 53, they put their trust in the right place, and God came through, and they were victorious. There was a father who went rock climbing with his young son, and as they were climbing around the rocks, the father heard his son yell. He said, "Hey, Dad, catch me." And as he turned around, he saw that his son had already jumped. It was already falling down, and he quickly turned and just caught him in time, just before he hit the rocks. They both fell on the rocks, but he caught him just in time. And the dad was scared. He was, when he finally came back and he found his voice again after the scare, he asked his son, "Why did you do that?" And his son just calmly responded. He said, "Because you're my dad." It was just It was just obvious. He was his dad, and he didn't worry. He just jumped. And this is kind of the trust that David has developed in God. He trusts God completely and absolutely with his life. Now we come to Psalms 54, and this is the psalm where David's life, once again, is in danger. The Ziphites lived about 15 miles southeast of Hebron. And twice they betrayed David to Saul. Now you might ask, where is Hebron? Remember that when David first became king, he reigned in Hebron, which is about 18 miles south and just a little bit east of Jerusalem. So 18 miles south, and the Ziphites lived another 15 miles southeast. So that's kind of where these people lived, and they knew where David was hiding. He was hiding in their area. And twice they betrayed David. They probably promised him, oh, we won't tell where you are. We won't tell Saul and his men. But they did. And they betrayed him. And both times David turns to the Lord for deliverance, and God delivers him. Look in verse 1. It says, chapter 54, well, let's read the heading. To the chief musician with string instruments, the contemplation of David when the Ziphites went and said to Saul, is David not hiding with us? And then in verse 1, we see him turning to the Lord. Save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your strength. Hear my prayer, O God, and give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen up against me, and oppressors have sought my life. They have not set God before them. Selah. And then we hear that God hears his cry. In verse 4, we see the turning point from crying out to the Lord to a calm rest, where he trusts in God's deliverance. It says, behold, God is my helper. The Lord is with those who uphold my life. He will repay my enemies for their evil. Cut them off in your truth. I will freely sacrifice to you. I will praise your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me out of all trouble, and my eye has seen its desire upon my enemies. Notice in verse 7 it says, he has delivered me. David sees his deliverance as already completed. Isn't that exactly what we see in Hebrews chapter 11? People of faith. It says faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not yet seen. It's believing it, even though it hasn't yet happened. And that's exactly what we see in David's life. He has such trust in God. He speaks as if his deliverance has already occurred. And then in chapter 55, we're kind of going through these chapters quite quickly. Many of these chapters are kind of repetitive, so we're just kind of skimming right through them. Chapter 55, this is a psalm that may have been written at the earliest stage of Absalom's rebellion. When David was still in Jerusalem, and the storm clouds were gathering as Absalom and his rebellion were gaining momentum, David here refers to his most trusted advisor, Ahithophel, who defected to him. And in verse 12 and 14, we kind of see how he feels about that. In verse 12 of chapter 55, he says, for it is not an enemy who reproaches me. So now you can imagine, David is in his palace, he's contemplating, he's seeing the storms gathering, he's seeing Absalom gathering momentum, and then he begins to recognize that one of his own, in his own palace, is against him, has defected to him. Verse 12, for it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me who has exalted himself against me, then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God in the throng. So in the first 5 verses, David expresses his feelings, how he felt during this period of time. And I think it's helpful to kind of see what a man of God experienced during difficult times of his life. We see him experience when his life was in danger. We see him experience being mistreated and lied about. We see him, in this case, deceived by his own or betrayed by his very own. We see David, how he handles and what he goes through in all these different scenarios. So in first 5 verses here of chapter 55, we see David expressing his feelings. Look in verse 1. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and do not hide yourself from my supplication. Attend to me and hear me. I am restless in my complaint, and moan noisily because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they bring down trouble upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. These are the feelings that David experienced during this time. Now, we cannot put our trust in feelings, but they are real. But our trust should be in the Lord. You know, feelings oftentimes may not even reflect reality. Some studies show that 90% of our fears do not come to pass. So oftentimes we may fear things that they're not rational, especially in a time of great trouble, when we are really pained, as David is here. Feelings can be exaggerated, and it's not really doesn't coincide with reality. And then what happens, you start to dream about what if things were different. And we see that happening with David. Look in verse 6. He says, So I said, Oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest. Is that not how life oftentimes is? Or first thought, how can I get out of this one? If only I could change these circumstances. We see that for Elijah. When he was in danger, he fled. He fled to the cave, hoping to get some safety from Jezebel. Jeremiah longed for a quiet and a peaceful place just to get away from all the wicked people around him. We read of that in Jeremiah chapter 9. But maybe we should not think so much, how can I get out of this, but what can I get out of this? Why is the Lord allowing me to go through this? It's not so much how quickly can I get out, that I could just fly away like a dove, but Lord, what can I get out of this? What can I learn from this? Now, in the following verses, David now reasons how God could solve the problem. So first, he expresses his feelings, and then secondly, he kind of daydreams about just, if things were different, if only this had happened or that, then it would be different. It's kind of like, and then thirdly, he starts reasoning. In verse 9, he says, Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around on its walls, and iniquity and trouble are also in the midst of it. Destruction is in the midst. Oppression and deceit do not depart from its streets. For it is not an enemy who reproaches me. We read those verses. Let's go down to verse 15. Let death seize them. Let them go down alive into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He has redeemed my soul and peace, and from the battle that was against me, for there were many against me. So he's praying, or kind of planning how God could solve the problem. If he would bring confusion into Absalom's plan. If he would bring death into their camp. And no doubt this was a prayer of David, and that's exactly what happened. Hushai came back from being with David. He came back and he thwarted the plans and defeated Absalom. And Absalom lost his life, and Ahithophel lost his life, or he took his life. So we kind of see that what David actually was thinking, or his planning, actually took place. It actually occurred. Continuing reading in verse 22, cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. But you, O God, shall bring them down to the pit of destruction. Bloodthirsty and deceitful man shall not live out half their days. But I will trust in you. So first David expresses his feelings, and then he kind of daydreams about sailing away to safety. It's kind of, we could say this is really the denial phase. And then he reasons with himself. I think David kind of had a mastermind. He was plotting, he was thinking, like, how could this be resolved? And then lastly, he just simply puts his trust in the Lord. And then Psalms 56 says, to the chief musician, set to the silent dove in the distant lands, a Michtam of David, when the Philistines captured him in Gath. So this is a psalm written while David is in great despair. He's in doubt. He has left Judah and he's fled to Gath, which is Philistine territory. And at this point, he's alone. He's just fled from Saul, and he doesn't have all this following at this point. He's alone, and he comes to the Philistines, and he's not well accepted, because they recognize that this David is the man that killed their guy, Goliath. And it would almost seem as if the momentum begins to build, and there's all this almost like mob-like behavior starting to occur around David, and he starts to fear. He's afraid that he's going to be killed. And try to get out of it, he starts to act like he's become mad. He's crawling under, with his nails. He's scratching on the door with his nails. He's foaming at his mouth, allowing his saliva to flow over his beard. And David now writes about that. He cries out to the Lord to deliver him from death. And we see that in verse 1. It says, be merciful to me, O God, for man would swallow me up. Fighting all day he oppresses me. My enemies would hound me all day. For there are many who fight against me, O Most High. See, maybe that's kind of what he experienced during the day. There was this momentum, and people were starting to discuss, who is this David, and what should we do with him? And he's trying to figure out his way out, how he can escape. Verse 3, whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God, I will praise his word. In God, I have put my trust. I will not fear. What can flesh do to me? All day they twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. And then in verse 6 and on, we see that David prays that God would remember the suffering that he went through. They gather together, they hide, they mark my steps when they lie in wait for my life. Shall they escape by iniquity, and anger cast down the peoples, O God? You number my wanderings. Put my tears in your bottle. In other words, don't forget my suffering. Are they not in your book? When I cry out to you, then my enemies will turn back. Yes, I know, because God is for me. In God I will praise his word. In the Lord I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? So God has delivered him so he can praise him. Look in verse 12. Vows made to you are binding upon me, O God. I will render praises to you, for you have delivered my soul from death. Have you not kept my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? And then we come to Psalms 57. It says to the chief musician, set to do not destroy, a mixture of David when he fled from Saul into the cave. So this is a psalm that was written after David escaped from the Philistines in Gath, and he fled to the cave of Adullam. And later he moved to another cave, the cave of En-gedi. And this is a psalm that may have been penned during the night while David lay awake, was trying to sleep, and these thoughts kept going through his mind. Have you ever had that in your life? I'm sure most of us have had that. You sleep, try to sleep, and these thoughts just keep going through your mind. And it's almost like David is experiencing that. He's dealing with PTSD, with post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe you've experienced something. It could be like, say, a near miss, a traffic accident, or something that was just like, it was really scary. And then you try to sleep at night, and that scene just keeps going through your mind. And it's almost like that's what's happening to him. If you look in verse 4, it says, my soul is among lions. I lie among the sons of men. He's lying down. He's trying to sleep. And then you look in verse 8. It says, awake, my glory. Awake, lute and harp. I will awaken at the dawn. The NIV says, my spirit, wake up. Harp and lyre, wake up. I want to sing and make music before the sun rises. So he's lying down, and now it's morning. He's standing up, and we kind of see what's going through his mind during that period of time. Look in verse 1. It says, be merciful to me, O God. Be merciful to me, for my soul trusts in you. And in the shadow of your wings I will make my refuge until these calamities have passed by. I will cry out to God the Most High, to God who performs all things for me. He shall send from heaven and save me. He reproaches the one who would swallow me up. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. My soul is among lions. I lie among the sons of man. See, this is kind of what's probably going through his mind. Who are set on fire, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue sharp sword. Be exalted, O God, above heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have dug a pit before me. Into the midst of it, they themselves have fallen. My heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and give praise. Awake, my glory. Awake, O lute and harp. I will awaken to the dawn. I will praise you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing to you among the nations, for your mercy reaches into the heavens, and your truth unto the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. You know what we can learn from David? He's not complaining. He could be in the cave complaining and thinking about all the things that he's missing back in Jerusalem. His favorite food. He's missing a nice warm bed. He's missing his family. His wife is taken away from him. He could complain about these things, but yet somehow in the midst of that cave, he's worshiping. He's worshiping the Lord. He takes control of his mind. And then we come to Psalms 58, and this is a psalm that may have been written by David late in his exile, just about when Saul died, or it could have been written actually just a little bit after that, when he was reigning in Hebron. During David's exile, or the years that he fled, Saul led a nation to a spiritual and economic ruin. And it's possible that the men that followed David, including David, lost everything in the process. David himself is mistreated. He's probably lost his parents in the process. It's possible that they were killed in Moab. And his father-in-law has left him a weakened and a divided nation. All the lies and propaganda that came from Saul and his men had taken a toll on the nation. And now David is left with these, I guess we could say, a nation that's left with smoking embers. That's all that's left of the nation. And this is a precatory psalm. It's a psalm where it's like David is giving his request or his recommendations or things that David wishes for. Let's begin reading in verse 1. It says, "Do you indeed speak righteous to you, silent ones? Do you judge uprightly, you sons of man? No, in heart you work wickedness. You weigh out violence of your hands and the earth. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. Their poison is like poison of a serpent. They are like deaf cobra that stops its ears, which shall not heed the voice of charmers, charming ever so skillfully. Break their teeth in their mouth, O God. Break out the fangs of the young lions, O Lord." Now I can imagine David as he is now, let's just say that he is by this time in Hebron and he's reigning over just 2 tribes and he's seeing just the division of the land, he's seeing the destruction of the land, he's seeing the division, he just sees the ruin, that it just angers David. There's probably times when he feels like crying, and then there's times that he just feels like he's just angered by it. He just break out their teeth, Lord, for bringing all this damage. Look in verse 7. "Let them flow away as waters which run continually. When he bends his bow, let his arrow be as if cut in pieces. Let them be like a snail which melts away as it goes, like a stillborn child of a woman that may not see the sun. Before your pots can feel the burning thorns, he shall take them away as with a whirlwind, as in his living and burning wrath. The righteous shall rejoice when he sees the vengeance. He shall wash his feet in the blood of the wicked, so that man will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely he is God who judges the earth." And then we'll do one more psalm. It's Psalm 59. And this is a psalm that is written early on in David's military life when he became part of Saul's army. And Saul begins to hate David because he became envious of David, for it was obvious that God was with him. One day when they came back from battle, the women sang, "Saul has killed his thousands." I can just imagine Saul beginning to grin ear to ear. Saul has killed his thousands. Man, this is awesome. This is great. Women dancing, this parade. I've killed my... He thought this is great. Until they came to the second verse, and they saying, "But David his 10,000. Then he began to frown. And he began to eye David with suspicion. All of a sudden, it's as if the lights went on in Saul. You know what? I'm not going to be the king. David will be the king. He is the future king. And he became envious of David. And he began to hate David with such a passion that he tried to kill him. And then Saul sent for David to be killed in his very own bed. His wife is there, and he helps him escape. And then David writes a psalm of this experience. In verse 1, it says, "Deliver me from my enemies, O my God. Defend me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from the workers of iniquity, and save me from bloodthirsty men. For look, they lie in wait for my life. The mighty gather against me, not for my transgression, nor for my sin, O Lord. They run and prepare themselves through no fault of mine." Verse 14, or rather verse 13, "Consume them in wrath, consume them, that they may not be, and let them know that God rules in Jacob." Can you imagine when he says that, "Consume them, Lord, consume"? Can you imagine his anger at times? thinking that his wife has been taken away from him for no sin of his. It's just completely injustice. And it says in verse 14, and at the evening they return, they growl like a dog and go all around the city. They wander up and down for food and howl if they were not satisfied. But I will sing of your power. Yes, I will sing aloud of your mercy in the morning. See the difference? Verse 14 and 15. The enemies, they are pursuing him. They return in the evening. They growl like a dog. They go all around the city. They wander up and down for food and howl as if they're not satisfied. This is what happens when people are envious, when people are not in the will of God. But then David, on the other hand, even though his wife is taken away from him, his family is taken away from him, he's out there in a cave, he's out there, he says, but I will sing of your power. Yes, I will sing aloud of your mercy in the morning. For you have been my defense and refuge in the day of my trouble. To you, O my strength, I will sing praises, for God is my defense, my God of mercy. So was it an easy life for David? No. Was David free of mistakes? No. But he was a man that chose to put his faith in God. In the end, God used his life to bless the whole world through his descendants and through our Messiah that came from David. Let's close tonight in prayer. Father, we thank you just once again for the words that we read of here in the book of Psalms. And we just see the thought patterns that tend to go through our minds, the stages that are there when we go through the valleys in our life, or even through mountaintops in our life for that matter. But we see that feelings and thoughts are not always real, they're not always a reality. But in the midst of that turmoil, the right thing to do is to put or trust in you, to plant both our feet on the Word of God. And when we do, we know that we will come out on the other side victorious. We thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for joining us tonight, and may God bless you. Have a great night.